In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can back up your Baserow instance and how to restore your data safely without losing any of it. We will have a look into two scenarios. We will at first have a look into the default Baserow container that contains the Baserow application, Caddy, and also the Postgres server. And then we will also have a look on how to back up the Baserow instance when you have your database on an external Postgres server. The things I will show you today are also applicable for different other scenarios. So we will be talking about how to back up Docker volumes and how to restore them. And we will also talk about how to handle external database systems in this scenario. When you have an application like, let's say, for example, WordPress or Ghost or whatever, the backup process will basically very similar. So this does not only apply to Baserow. I will just use Baserow as an example here. So let's get into it. I will not go too much into installing Baserow. I made other videos on that topic, so please go watch the other videos. And I will use the Baserow documentation to make it easy for you to follow along when it comes to the backup and restore commands. And for now, I will just quickly spin up a new Baserow instance here on my local computer. So I get over to my terminal and just execute a docker run command to spin up a Baserow container. And then I just head back to my browser and go to localhost on port 3010 here. And as you can see, I am greeted with a brand new Baserow installation. So there is no admin user setup and no database. I would just quickly put some data in. So create my user, and this one we can skip. This we also skip. And I just name it default workspace. We don't need any collaborators right now. And I would just name this database test and go for project tracking and just let it create my database here. So now we have a Baserow instance with the test database and just some amount of data in it. And now let's have a look how we can make a backup for our instance here. So when I head back to the Baserow docs and scroll down a little bit, you will have an entry for backup all of Baserow. And as you can see here, this utilizes two commands. First of all, to stop the Baserow container, so there's no data written to the database and to the file system anymore. And on the second line here, we have a command that will create a temporary container that will basically archive the Baserow data in order to move it to another machine. So let's try that out. First of all, we will stop the Baserow container, and then I will just paste in the command from the documentation. And to break it down, we will just use a docker run command to run a container. And the RM flag stands for remove. That means as soon as the container finishes, it is deleted. And here we mount the Baserow volume. That's the same as we did up here. So we map the Baserow data volume into the folder Baserow data. And we also mount another volume here, which is the current working directory. And that is mounted to /backup in the container. And this is a container name. This is a default Ubuntu container. And this command will basically archive the Baserow data folder into backup.tar. And when we execute this, and just let me clear this out and have a look here, you can see we have a backup.tar file here. And that's basically all you need to do to back up a Baserow instance that is running the default Baserow container. And now let's pretend we have a brand new system here. And for that, we will just remove the container we have created before. So I will just remove the Baserow container. And then I will, of course, also remove the Baserow data volume from my system here. And now we are working with the clean slate again. And when I head back to the documentation for restoring all of Baserow, it will first ask to stop any existing Baserow instance. But in this case, we won't need that because we don't have a Baserow instance running yet. In case there is already a Baserow instance running, this will suggest to back up the Baserow data volume of that running instance, because when we import the data we have just backed up, we will just overwrite that. So in our case, we can just take the third command here, head back to our terminal, and just paste that in. And this will again create a temporary container from the Ubuntu Linux distribution. I will just make some small changes here because I want my data in the volume named baserow_data. And in this case, this will map to the folder results within the container. And here we again map the local folder. I have my backup file in here into /backup in our container. And then it will just basically create a results folder here we are referring to in the front and restore the contents of our backup file into our folder here. So when I execute this, the data is written into the Baserow data volume here. And now when I spin up a brand new Baserow container here, this will take again about 30 seconds to start. And then I get back to my browser and call localhost on port 3010. And you can see my data is perfectly fine and as we left it before. And for those of you who use Podman instead of Docker, it is even easier. So on Podman, you can just use the Podman volume export command. And then you have a backup file. You don't need to spin up a temporary container and so on and so forth, because Podman has a dedicated subcommand on the volume to export all of the data of a volume. And of course, there is a corresponding import subcommand on Podman. So on Podman, it's even easier to back up and restore data volumes from Docker containers. And as you can see, on the default Baserow container, it's very easy to back up and restore because you only have this one container which holds all the data. And as the database is already included in the Baserow container, there's nothing else really you need to back up here. Another common scenario is that you have your Baserow container running and that your Postgres database is running externally. So this could be the host you have your Docker container running on, or this could just be one central Postgres server on your network, for example. And in this case, we will have an additional step to do that is basically backing up the Postgres database and restoring it. So let's have a look into that. So in case we are running an external Postgres server, our commands are a little bit different here. When running the command, we specify some environment variables that basically tell the Baserow container how to connect to the database host. And in this case, we have a database host running on my main machine that also runs the Docker service. So in this case, the database host is host.containers.internal, and that will just tell the container to connect to the database on the host machine. And here we have the default port for Postgres, and we have a database named Baserow, a user named Baserow, and a database password name. So that's basically all of it, and I can just start my container here, and then I can head back to my browser here, and I have assigned port 3020 for this scenario. And here we are again greeted with a completely empty Baserow instance. So I will just create some data here and skip this, also skip that. And just for reference, name that external, skip for now. I don't know, name it external DB. Do a project tracking again. And now this is set up and we have some data in it. And the backup steps are very similar. So we can just go back to the documentation. And first of all, we need to stop Baserow again. And then I can already copy the backup command here. So I stop the Baserow container, and now I can just copy in the backup command again, and I will just rename this one to backup external so we can distinguish the backups from each other, and clear this out. And when we have a look here, you can see here that the external backup is much smaller than the other one. And that's because the database itself is not stored on the volume in this case. In order to back up the database here, we can just execute a Postgres command here. So there's a program coming with the Postgres installation that's pgdump. And with this command, we refer to the user Baserow. And here we specify that the database Baserow should be written to a file, and here we just specify the file name here. And when I execute this and have a look here, you can see that the Baserow database backup has been created. Now I will just create a clean slate again. So I will delete the Baserow container, and I will also delete the data volume in this case. And then I will head into the Postgres administration and have a look here. You can see we have a Baserow database here, and that one I will just also delete. So we drop the database Baserow, and we also drop the user Baserow. And when we have a look here, you can see this is gone now. And now we can basically just repeat the steps we have done before. So I take the third command here from the documentation here and paste this in here. And I rename this one to external because we have renamed that before. And I want this volume named Baserow underscore data again. Now our volume is restored, and of course, as we don't have the database in our volume right now, we need to make sure that the database is set up and running. So we will just do that. We will use our Postgres administration again. And we will start by creating a user Baserow here. Then create the database. And then we can either grant all privileges to the Baserow user for the Baserow database, or we can just make the Baserow user the owner of the Baserow database here. And when we have a look here, our Baserow database is available now. And when I connect to the database and have a look here, there's nothing in it yet. So we can just close this for now. And in our folder here, we have our Baserow backup.sql. And now we can restore the database. So there's a pg restore command on a Postgres installation, and we give it the user Postgres and set the database to Baserow here. And here we just reference our SQL file and execute this. And now when I head back to the Postgres administration here, I can select the Baserow database and have a look here. And here you can see all the tables have been restored. So now we have restored our volume, and we have also restored our database in our external database system. And now we can just spin up the container again, and we of course need to use the same credentials here as before. So we connect to Postgres on our host with the same credentials here, and I can just execute this. And this will take again around 30 seconds to spin up the container. And now I can head back to my browser and refresh here. And as you can see, my data is exactly the same as before. So that was a quick rundown on how to backup and restore a Baserow instance. And as I said before, the principles of this video are very similar for other software projects. So basically, when it comes to backing up Docker containers and the associated data, you usually back up the Docker volume. And if you're using an external database system, you also need to back up the external database. So that's it from me today. Take care. Bye-bye.